Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to St Mary's Vicarage on this Tuesday, the 16th of March. And what a splendid day we had yesterday, which I was very grateful for, as it was my day off. Real pleasure to have some sun and sunshine, which was good, but looking a bit more miserable today. And beginning of a new week, and lockdown continues, and things continue to change slowly. Of course, now there's all this concern in Europe about the AstraZeneca vaccine. Well, I'm due to have my vaccine on Wednesday, and nothing's going to stop me having the vaccine, because I hope that this will help restore something to near normality eventually in this country. So yes, I will be heading to Wilton on Wednesday to have my vaccine, whichever one it may be, and so that will be good. It was good Mothering Sunday, obviously, and a very different Mothering Sunday. It was good to do our Zoom breakfast church. Apologies to anybody who I noticed that after the service had finished that I had a couple of emails of people trying to log on to Zoom or had joined Zoom, but for some reason they didn't appear in the what I call the waiting room area. So apologies if you tried to join on Sunday and for some reason couldn't. I'm not quite sure what happened there. So just looking ahead to this coming week, this Wednesday evening we've got our Lent course continuing. And we're going to be looking at what they call the divine office, or the daily office, morning and evening prayer, that tradition within the church, and also intercessions, talking about intercessions. So that will be this coming Wednesday, and the accompanying leaflets will hopefully go out today for that. Now, of course, this coming Sunday is the fifth Sunday in Lent. But also, it really does mark a year since the pandemic really began. It's a sort of a year's anniversary that we were told by the Prime Minister not to travel unless it was absolutely necessary, and that hospitality and such like closed. And I was looking through the online broadcasts this morning, several hundred of them, and realised that the first online broadcast I did was on the 27th of March. So that will sort of mark an anniversary coming up before too long. So yes, it's been a year, and things are changing, but this Sunday there will be a physical Holy Communion service in St Mary's Church, and as I've mentioned, there will be that will be streamed live as well. We've sorted out the tech problems in the church. But for those who physically attend the service, there'll also be an opportunity to light a candle during that service. And I believe on Sunday we are invited as a nation to light a candle and place it in our windows, or a light in our windows, to sort of mark this this anniversary of the pandemic. So we'll be focusing a little bit on that, as well as the fifth Sunday of Lent. So it's a said Holy Communion service here at St Andrews on this coming Sunday. Later on this week, I'm going to be having my first meeting with the church wardens of Fernham, Chettle and Tollard, as we seek to become this bigger benefice, taking in these new churches and forming this new partnership. I'm quite excited about this. I've done this before. My very first parish, I started with 3 churches, not dissimilar here, and we expanded to 7. So I've walked this road before, and though it can be challenging, it also brings a lot of excitement and interest, because we form new relationships with churches and communities, and that opens up all sorts of other interesting possibilities. So I'm looking forward to that meeting on Friday. And one of the things at the top of the agenda is going to be discussing a new service pattern. The Archdeacon has asked myself and 2 of the other clergy, who in a sense will be taking various parishes from what was the Chase benefice into what might become a team ministry down at the Blandford end or up here a benefice and such like. So we've been asked to look at developing a new service pattern for the areas that we will eventually be responsible for. So in a sense, that's the first sort of discussion, looking at how that is all going to work. So interesting stuff, and the hope is that when the restrictions are finished and we're able to sort of move back to a more regular pattern of physical worship, that this new service pattern will come into being, which means that I'll be able to go and take services at Fernham, Chettle and Tollard, which in one sense is nothing new, because I was doing that before the pandemic when Father Michael was the vicar over at Chase Benefice. I was already taking services in those three churches in preparation for this, so it'll be sort of continuing, but looking at how it all dovetails together. So quite interesting and exciting stuff. Now, of course, it was also a very challenging weekend in a sense, with everything that happened in London, and of course the tragic death of Sarah Everard, a young woman who was murdered, and obviously we're not sure what all the circumstances are around that, and of course the situation that happened on Clapham Common with the protesters, and what was a peaceful vigil and then seemed to be disturbed by some other elements were there, and of course the police handling of the situation. I don't want to really get into that, because there's two sides to that argument, which was that we are in a pandemic and the protest wasn't allowed, though the judge, I believe, wouldn't make a decision on it and all of that sort of thing. What I do want to say is that I think it's a real serious issue that needs to be looked at, and that is women's safety. I have several female friends who live in large cities, and particularly London, and all of them have told me rather alarming and disturbing stories of the way they have been treated in those cities, at work, in places of work, on public transport, walking home, and really it's very, very shocking when you hear those stories, and it really does happen, and I feel sad, because it probably was always there in a sense, but what has happened to, in a sense, the sort of chivalry and being a gentleman, and having tremendous respect for women, and I'm really shocked when I hear some of my friends' stories of what's happened to them, and shocked that men feel that they have a right to behave towards women in that way. So it is a huge underlying problem, and obviously as men, we may never have experienced this kind of harassment, though I know some men have, and I think it is an issue that as a nation we do need to to look at, and we do need to listen to the stories of these women seriously, particularly stories where women have felt harassed at work or objectified at work, and have felt in a situation that they can't complain or make a complaint because they're terrified that they'll lose their job, and then after that they'll have some sort of record or mark on their thing as a sort of a complainer or a troublemaker, and it really does have to stop. And if we look to the extremes of how, say, somebody like Jimmy Savile behaved, he got away with, lots of people knew what he was doing, but he got away with it because nobody would speak up. People knew what he was like, but nobody would say anything. It was all just sort of brushed under the carpet. And really, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and it just shows a huge lack of respect for people in what should be a modern, civilized society. So my prayers are particularly for Sarah's family, at this time, and the awful pain that they're going through. Losing a child is bad enough, but under such circumstances, just absolutely terrible. But I also pray that, in a sense, that we, this may be a bit of an eye opener for us as a nation, and to understand that we do really need to learn to treat each other with proper respect. So yeah, an interesting thing, and but the politics of Sunday, of the vigil, are very, very complicated, so I'm not really going to go into that, but it is very clear that we should have respect for one another. Right, so moving on, because I have to nip out this morning for another meeting. Let's have a look at this passage, the gospel passage for today. From John's Gospel, chapter 5, beginning to read at verse 1. It's a very well-known healing miracle here, but there's something in it that's always intrigued me. There was a Jewish festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now at the sheep pool in Jerusalem there is a building called Bethesda in Hebrew, consisting of 5 porticos, and under these were crowds of sick people, blind, lame, paralysed. One man there had an illness which had lasted 38 years, and when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been in this condition for a long time, he said, "Do you want to be well again?" "Sir," replied the sick man, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is disturbed, and while I am still on the way, someone else gets there before me." Jesus said, "Get up, pick up your sleeping mat and walk." The man was cured at once, and he picked up his mat and walked away. Now that day happened to be the Sabbath, so Jesus said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. You are not allowed to carry your sleeping mat." He replied, "But the man who cured me told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" They asked, "Who is this man who said to you, 'Pick up your mat and walk'?" The man had no idea who it was, since Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that filled the place. After a while, Jesus met him in the temple and said, "Now you are well again. Be sure not to sin any more, or something worse may happen to you." The man went back and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had cured him. It was because he did things like this on the Sabbath that the Jews began to persecute Jesus. So one of the very well-known healing miracles, and the bit that's always struck me in this particular passage, is this very interesting question that Jesus asks the paralysed man. He says to him, "Do you want to be well again? Do you want to be well again?" It's a very odd question to ask somebody that's been paralysed for 38 years. And you would think, why ask that question? Would he not want to say, "Yes, of course I want to be made well"? And I think that's a very interesting question to ask all of us with regard to, in a sense, healing, whether it be physical healing or spiritual healing we need, or forgiveness, or whatever it is that question we need to ask ourselves: do we want to be well again? And I think why that question is so important is that, sometimes we get into a pattern of life, and even though it might not be right or whatever, we just sort of stick with it. We do nothing about it, and we just sort of put up with it because of a fear of change, because of a fear of the unknown. And in a sense, maybe that's something of what's going on with this man at the pool. He's been like that for 38 years, it says, and in a sense he's familiar with what has to happen. He goes to the pool, or he gets to the pool, and he tries to get to the pool, and that was his life. To actually be made physically well again would be a really life-changing experience. He wouldn't be able to beg anymore. He'd probably have to find work and a job and all those sorts of things. And it's a very interesting question, I think, a very powerful question. Do you want to be well again? And are there aspects in our lives that, if we were asked that by Jesus, do you really want to change? Do you really want to do that? What would our response be? Would we immediately say, yes, Lord, I want that, knowing the changes that might bring to us? And I think that's a very powerful thing, which I encountered with a very good friend of mine who I grew up with, and he was always very supportive of me going to church. You know, I went to church. He wasn't a churchgoer and everything, and very supportive and encouraging of what I did and my faith. But it was never particularly for him. And I remember one day getting into quite a deep conversation with him about sort of faith, life, and the universe, probably over a pint of beer. And what was interesting, he said to me, he said, "Oh, I admire your faith and your commitment to it and what you're doing." He said, "But he said I could never do that, or never do that." And I asked him why, and his response wasn't that he couldn't believe in a divine being or a God or anything like that, or it wasn't that he didn't believe in a spiritual dimension to life. His response was this. He said, "If I went down that road, it would mean that my life would have to change so much that I'm not sure I could cope with it." And he said, "I'm sort of comfortable where I am." And that's fine. That's the personal choice that God allows everybody to have, which is a good thing. But it's very interesting as well, and I might be just picking at straws here, but it's interesting that the man here was, he'd been like that for 38 years. Of course, the number 40 is very important in the Bible. Noah spent 40 days in the ark, 40 days in the wilderness, all that sort of thing. The Israelites spent 40 years in the desert, in the wilderness. And in a sense, I think it just hints about how sometimes in life we might be almost sort of held in bondage by the life we lead, the place that we live in, the work that we do, etc., etc. And though, we may sit and dream about other things that we might do, we're fearful, in a sense, to take that step because of the changes that it may bring. And this is a lesson I think Peter learnt very drastically when Jesus asked him to step out of the boat, the boat being safe and secure, and to walk on water. So it's a very interesting passage. Do you want to be well again, is the question that is asked. Right, well, I do hope you have a good day today, folks. I've got to go down to St Andrew's Church now, just to go and check that out and meet the new people that have moved into the house there. And then I've got several Zoom meetings today, so I'll have square eyes by the end of the day. But looking forward to Scouts this evening online. So do take care, folks. Let's just close with a grace. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Take care, folks. Have a good day.